The night it allegedly happened wasn't loud. No cameras. No palace gates. No flashing headlines. Just silence. And a question that refuses to go away. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if the most shocking truth about Prince Harry wasn't hidden in a court document, a memoir, or a Netflix series, but buried inside a sentence he never meant the world to hear? Think about this for a second. At 40 years old, after years of lawsuits, interviews, royal exits, and public meltdowns, what could possibly be left for Prince Harry to admit? What could still be so heavy that it would follow him across oceans, across marriages, across continents? Here's the unsettling part. For years, people have whispered, quietly, uncomfortably, sometimes cruelly, sometimes cautiously, questions about timing, about language, about distance, about moments that didn't quite add up. Questions most people dismissed as gossip, or conspiracy, or cruelty. But what if those questions weren't born from malice, but from cracks that were always there? This story matters now because something changed, not in the headlines, but in Harry himself. 40 isn't just a birthday. It's a reckoning. It's the age where denial gets tired, where rehearsed answers start slipping, where the body remembers what the mouth tries to forget. And suddenly, people notice something strange. Harry stopped saying certain things. He started choosing different words. He laughed at moments that didn't call for laughter. He went silent when silence felt loud. Ask yourself this. Have you ever watched someone protect a truth so fiercely that the effort itself becomes visible? That's where this story begins. Not with a declaration, not with proof, but with tension, with contradictions, with emotional static humming beneath every public appearance. And no, this isn't about attacking anyone. This isn't about assigning blame. This is about understanding what happens when a man builds his identity around honesty and then finds himself cornered by something he can't say without destroying everything he's built. Because here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. If a man truly believed he was the biological father of his children, why would he need to clarify it at all? Why would the words biological even enter the conversation? And if he didn't, how long could he live with that truth before it demanded air? Tonight, we're not here to prove anything. We're here to follow the emotional breadcrumbs, the pauses, the deflections, the moments that made even longtime supporters stop and say, "Wait, did you hear that?" By the end of this story, you may not walk away with certainty, but you will understand why this question refuses to die, and why, if an admission was ever made, it may not have been planned or forgiven. Because once certain words leave your mouth, even in private, they don't just disappear. And what allegedly followed that moment would set off a chain reaction no one could stop. People love to say the signs were never there, that this all came out of nowhere, that no one could have predicted it. But that simply isn't true. The cracks didn't appear overnight. They appeared slowly, quietly, in moments that felt insignificant at the time. A word here, a pause there, a joke that landed just a little too wrong. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back on a conversation and realized the truth was hiding in plain sight the entire time? Because that's exactly what's happening now. Years ago, Prince Harry spoke about fatherhood with a kind of enthusiasm that felt raw and real, almost defiant, like he was proving something to the world, to the palace, maybe even to himself. He talked about protecting his children, breaking cycles, being the father he never felt he had. But then something shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough for people to notice, if they were paying attention. The language softened, then narrowed. Statements became carefully framed. Warmth gave way to distance. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Instead of saying "my children," he began saying "the kids." Instead of "as their father," it became "as a parent." Small changes, easy to dismiss, until you realize how intentional public figures are with words. Was it media training? Maybe. Was it stress? Possibly. Or was it something deeper trying not to surface? There were moments that made even loyal supporters pause. Interviews where questions about the children were redirected. Appearances where emotional reactions felt delayed, almost practiced, as if he were responding the way a father should respond, not the way one instinctively does. And before you jump to conclusions, stop. This isn't about coldness or lack of love. Some of the most loving parents in the world aren't biological parents at all. So why does this matter? Because humans don't guard lies the same way they guard truths they're afraid of. There's a difference between hiding something out of shame and protecting something out of fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of collapse. Fear of what happens when the story you've lived inside stops matching the story you've told. Here's the contradiction that refuses to stay quiet. Harry built his post-royal identity on radical honesty, on my truth, on breaking silence, on saying the things the monarchy never allowed him to say. So why would this be the one subject surrounded by fog? Why, in a world where everything else was exposed, trauma, resentment, family conflict, did this remain untouched? Ask yourself honestly, if the truth was simple, would it need so much protection? And then there's the timing. People close to the situation say the tension wasn't public at first. It was internal, private, a weight carried for years, a reality navigated carefully behind closed doors, where words mattered even more because there were no cameras to perform for. Which brings us to the moment everything allegedly changed. Because cracks are one thing, but pressure does something else entirely. And when pressure meets exhaustion, people say things they never planned to say. Especially when they believe no one else is listening. But someone may have been. And what was allegedly said next, in a private moment, to the wrong person at the wrong time, would take this story from speculation to something far more unsettling. Because once that line was crossed, there was no pretending the cracks weren't real. And what followed would make walking it back impossible. It didn't happen on a stage. It didn't happen in front of microphones or flashing lights. And that's exactly why it mattered. The alleged confession didn't arrive as a statement. It arrived as a slip. A moment when the armor was off. When exhaustion did what no interviewer ever could. Let me ask you this. Have you ever told yourself, just for a second, that you were finally safe enough to say the thing you've been burying for years? Because that's how this moment is described by those who claim to know about it. Not dramatic. Not rehearsed. Almost defeated. The setting matters here. This wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a challenge. It was a conversation that had drifted too close to the edge. A discussion about legacy, about pressure, about the toll of living under a microscope. And then, according to accounts that surfaced later, the conversation crossed into dangerous territory. Fatherhood, not in the glowing, protective way Harry had spoken about it before, but in a way that sounded heavy, technical, careful. The kind of language people use when they're choosing words so precisely that the effort itself becomes noticeable. That's when it allegedly happened. A sentence. Short. Quiet. Almost immediately regretted. Not shouted. Not announced. Just stated. And the moment it was said, the energy in the room reportedly changed. Because some truths don't need confirmation to feel real. You feel them in the silence that follows. In the way no one rushes to respond. In the way people suddenly avoid eye contact. Here's what makes this even more unsettling. According to those familiar with the situation, the admission wasn't framed with anger or denial. It wasn't defensive. It was resigned. As if the speaker wasn't confessing to others as much as finally admitting something to himself. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If this was a lie, why would it come out like that? Lies usually come with panic. With justification. With explanation. This, allegedly, came with none of that. Just a statement that landed too heavily to ignore. But before you draw conclusions, pause. Because even those who heard it didn't immediately know what to do with it. Was it literal? Was it emotional? Was it a man speaking metaphorically about distance, not DNA? Was it a moment of frustration taken too far? That ambiguity is what makes this story so volatile. Because once words like that exist, even in private, they don't stay contained. People replay them. They reinterpret them. They tell themselves they misheard. And then they tell someone else. And that's where everything starts to unravel. The alleged confession didn't spread because someone wanted it to. It spread because people didn't know how to carry it alone. Because when you hear something that contradicts a carefully constructed public narrative, your brain demands resolution. And resolution never stays private for long. What's even more striking is what didn't happen afterward. There was no immediate denial. No correction. No clarification. Just silence. And silence, in situations like this, is rarely neutral. Because the moment those words were spoken, whether literal or emotional, they triggered consequences no one could control. Conversations shifted. Tension increased. Decisions were reconsidered. And somewhere in all of that, someone realized this wasn't just a personal truth anymore. It was a story with gravity. And once gravity takes hold, things start moving whether you want them to or not. But the real shock wasn't the admission itself. It was who allegedly heard it and what they did next. Because that's where this stops being a private reckoning and becomes something much bigger. The question everyone wants answered isn't whether the words were spoken. It's what they mean. Because the moment that alleged admission existed, everything around it changed shape. Not loudly, not publicly, but subtly, like a hairline fracture spreading beneath the surface of glass. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Biology is only explosive when legacy is involved. If this were an ordinary family, the story might end with private conversations and quiet acceptance. But this isn't ordinary. This is a life built under historical weight, royal expectation, and public mythology. Titles, lineage, permanence. So when the idea of non-biological fatherhood enters that space, it doesn't just ask a personal question. It challenges an entire structure. And that's why the aftermath mattered more than the moment itself. Those close to the situation describe a shift, not in affection, not in care, but in posture. Decisions became slower. Language became even more careful, as if every word now carried a legal, emotional, and symbolic consequence. Think about that. What does it feel like to love children deeply, while knowing the world may one day question your right to claim them in the way you always have? That's not guilt. That's fear. Fear of losing authority. Fear of losing narrative control. Fear of becoming a footnote in someone else's story. And here's where the contradiction sharpens. Harry has always framed himself as the man who chose truth over institution. The one who walked away because silence was killing him. The one who refused to live a lie. So why would this truth, if it exists, remain buried? Unless revealing it would hurt more people than hiding it ever could. This is where opinions split. Some believe protecting children means protecting stability at all costs. Others argue that truth has a way of surfacing whether you prepare for it or not. And once it does, the damage is worse. Ask yourself honestly, if you were in that position, would you choose honesty or harmony? Because the implications don't stop with identity. They ripple outward. Media scrutiny, public judgment, endless speculation, children growing up under a cloud they never asked for. And suddenly, the question isn't who the biological father is. It's who pays the emotional price for the answer. That's why those closest to the situation reportedly feared one thing above all else. Not scandal, not headlines, but timing. Because truth revealed too early can destroy innocence. Truth revealed too late can destroy trust. And somewhere between those two fears sits a man caught between the role he plays and the reality he lives. But here's the twist most people don't see coming. Sometimes, the most dangerous part of a secret isn't the secret itself. It's the moment someone else decides they're tired of carrying it for you. Because once more than one person knows a truth, control begins to slip. Conversations happen without you. Interpretations form without your input. And that's when stories stop belonging to the people who live them. They belong to the people who tell them. And according to those watching closely, the final phase of this story wasn't triggered by anger or revenge. It was triggered by inevitability. Because once a narrative starts cracking from the inside, it doesn't need exposure. It collapses on its own. And what comes next isn't denial. It's reckoning. The question we started with was never really about biology. It was about truth. Because when you strip away the titles, the headlines, the speculation, what's left is a man standing at the intersection of love and reality, and realizing he can't fully protect both forever. If those words were ever spoken, whether literal or emotional, they didn't explode anything overnight. They didn't shatter families in a single moment. What they did was quieter, more dangerous. They changed how everything was understood. Think about it. Once a possibility like this exists, it rewrites the past in people's minds. Old interviews get replayed. Innocent phrases are re-examined. Silence becomes suspicious. Certainty becomes fragile. And that's the cost of ambiguity. Because ambiguity doesn't give closure. It gives fuel. This is where the story circles back to the beginning. To that quiet moment. The late night wait. The exhaustion of holding something that can't stay buried forever. If the admission was emotional rather than literal, it still reveals something raw. A distance. A fracture. A fear of not fully belonging in the role the world assumes you occupy. And if it was literal, the implications are even heavier, not because of scandal, but because of permanence. Because once truth enters the public bloodstream, it doesn't leave. It mutates. It grows. It lives its own life. But here's the reflection most people miss. Fatherhood isn't proven by DNA tests. It's proven in presence, in protection, in sacrifice, in choosing to stay when walking away would be easier. And sometimes the cruelest irony is this. The men who question their right to claim the title are often the ones who take it most seriously. So where does that leave us? Not with answers, not with proof, but with a mirror. A mirror that asks whether we care more about origins or outcomes. Whether we value certainty over compassion. Whether we're watching this story to uncover truth. Or to feel validated in what we already believe. And that's why this conversation isn't ending tonight. Because if this story has taught us anything, it's that some truths don't arrive as declarations. They arrive as pressure, as pauses, as words that slip out when someone is too tired to keep pretending. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If protecting children means carrying a truth alone, is that strength? Or is it a burden no one should have to bear? Let me know what you think. Respectfully, thoughtfully, because this story isn't about sides, it's about consequences. And whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. This isn't the last time this question will surface.